The captain had spent 21 days searching for his missing son and 21 nights praying for a miracle. The forest search had dragged on for weeks. Nothing worked. Not the drones, not the trained search teams, not even the military dogs. Hope was fading. Captain Harris, once a fearless soldier, now looked like a man shattered from the inside. His son had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but painful questions. But that day, something unbelievable happened. A little girl, no older than 8, walked up to him with her hands resting on the back of her German Shepherd. With innocent confidence, she spoke words that froze the entire diner. "Sir, my dog can find your son." Nobody knew who she was. Nobody understood what she meant. Some people laughed. Others stared in shock. The captain looked at the girl confused, exhausted, and nearly broken. His heart pounded. No search team, no helicopter, no expert had found a single clue. So how could a child and her dog make such a promise? No one knew. But her dog, he didn't blink. He looked straight into the captain's eyes, as if he knew something no one else did. And the moment the dog stepped forward, what happened next would shock everyone. Stay with us, because the case took a turn no human could explain. And the truth will leave you speechless. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The morning sun had barely risen when Captain Harris stepped out of his truck, the chill of the small town settling quietly around him. He stood still for a moment, his uniform carrying the dust of days that had blurred together. His face, once known for its unwavering confidence, now held a tiredness that no soldier deserved to know. The people of the town respected him deeply. He was the kind of man everyone trusted. But lately, whenever they saw him, their eyes softened with a silent, shared sorrow. Because everyone knew about his son. 3 weeks had passed since 13-year-old Ethan Harris disappeared without a trace. No clues, no witnesses, not a single lead strong enough to follow. Search teams had combed the forests, helicopters had scanned miles of rugged terrain, and trained K-9 units had worked tirelessly. Yet every attempt ended the same way, empty-handed. The captain, a man who had survived the hardest battlefields overseas, now faced the one mission he felt powerless in, finding his only child. Each day he walked through town, carrying the same quiet determination. And each day, hope slipped a little further away. But he couldn't stop searching. Not when Ethan's smile was still fresh in his memory. Not when every corner of their home reminded him of the boy who should have been there. He parked in front of the diner, not because he was hungry, but because it was one of the few places where he could sit for a moment without falling apart. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered. A few customers looked up, offering gentle nods. Conversations lowered to whispers, not out of gossip, but because they didn't want him to feel watched in his grief. Captain Harris took his usual seat near the window, resting his elbows on the table as he stared outside. His hands trembled slightly. Sleep had become a stranger. Every night he relived the phone call that shattered his world, the call telling him Ethan hadn't come home from school. He swallowed hard. He had led teams into war zones, rescued soldiers under fire, and survived ambushes. But nothing compared to the helplessness of a missing child. Nothing compared to not knowing. The waitress walked over slowly, placing a cup of coffee in front of him without asking. "If you need anything, anything at all," she whispered. He nodded gratefully, but said nothing. His voice had grown quieter with each passing day. He closed his eyes for a moment, and that's when a strange sound broke the silence. The sudden bark of a German Shepherd, and the footsteps of a little girl rushing toward him. The sharp bark echoed through the diner, instantly drawing every eye toward the door. Captain Harris opened his eyes slowly, unsure if the sound was real or just another reminder of the K-9 units that had failed to find Ethan. But this bark was different, higher, younger, full of energy. A German Shepherd stood at the entrance, alert, ears raised, tail still, and beside him was a little girl, maybe 9 years old, with her hair tied back and her hands gently gripping the dog's collar. She looked around the room with bright curiosity, completely unaware of the heavy silence she had walked into. The regulars, old farmers, tired workers, and families grabbing breakfast stared at the pair as if they were out of place in the sorrowful atmosphere. But the girl seemed unfazed. She whispered something to her dog, and the shepherd's eyes immediately scanned the diner. Then, As if pulled by an invisible thread, he locked his gaze on Captain Harris. The dog's tail stiffened, his ears tilted forward, his body lowered slightly, muscles tightening not in aggression, but focus. Pure, intense focus. The little girl frowned and tugged lightly. "Thor, heel," she whispered, but the dog didn't move. Instead, he began walking straight toward the captain's table. Whispers filled the room. "Is that a service dog? Who's that girl? Why's the dog acting like that?" Captain Harris lifted his head fully now, confusion flickering across his tired face. He had met countless trained dogs in the military. He knew the difference between random curiosity and purposeful behavior. This dog wasn't wandering. He was targeting. Thor stood directly in front of the captain, nose twitching as he sniffed the air around him. Not aggressively, almost. Searching. The girl arrived a second later, slightly out of breath. "I'm so sorry," she blurted. "He never does this. I promise he's well trained." The captain gave a weak nod. "It's all right," he murmured, though something about the situation tightened his chest. The dog wasn't just sniffing. He was circling, analyzing, then returning his gaze to the captain's face with a strange intensity. The girl gently placed her hand on Thor's back. "Hey, what's gotten into you?" But Thor didn't break eye contact. The diner had gone completely silent now. Even the waitress paused behind the counter, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Captain Harris leaned forward slightly. "Everything okay?" he asked softly, unsure why he felt a sudden jolt of anticipation. The girl opened her mouth to answer. But Thor took a single step closer, sat down in front of the captain, and let out a low, deliberate whine. A sound that didn't just break the silence. It changed it. Thor's low whine vibrated through the quiet diner, soft yet unsettling enough to make Captain Harris straighten in his seat. This wasn't the sound of a playful dog or a nervous one. It was precise, controlled, the kind of sound trained dogs made when they detected something important. The little girl tightened her grip on Thor's collar, her brows knitting together. "Thor, what are you doing?" she whispered, but the German shepherd ignored her completely. His nose lifted again, drawing in a deep breath as he studied the captain like he had found a hidden signal in the air. Captain Harris had seen this behavior before too many times on missions. Dogs didn't act like this without reason. His heartbeat quickened, not with fear, but something dangerously close to hope. Still, he couldn't let himself believe anything. Not yet. The girl stepped closer, her expression shifting from frustration to confusion. "He only does that when he's tracking something," she said softly, almost to herself. "But we're not tracking anything today." Thor suddenly stood up, his posture tall and alert. He moved behind the captain's chair, sniffing the back of it, the sleeves of his uniform, even the air around his shoulders. Every movement was deliberate, almost mathematical. People in the diner watched with growing curiosity. A man near the counter whispered, "Looks like that dog found something." Another muttered, "That soldier works with dogs, doesn't he? Maybe they sense each other." But the captain wasn't thinking about dogs bonding. He was thinking about Ethan. He swallowed hard and looked at the girl. "Does he usually approach strangers like this?" She shook her head immediately. "Never. He's trained to stay by my side unless I tell him otherwise." She hesitated. "But sometimes he reacts to people who've been around someone missing." Captain Harris froze. "What?" She bit her lip. "My dad's a volunteer search and rescue officer. Thor helps him. He's found lost hikers before. Once he found a boy who'd gone missing in the woods. Thor smelled something on the boy's father, his clothes, maybe, and followed the scent to find the kid." The captain's breath caught. Ethan's jacket, his room, his school, all of it carried the boy's scent. And Captain Harris had been surrounded by those things every single day. Thor stepped in front of him again and let out another controlled, deliberate whine. His eyes were sharp, alert, almost urgent. The dog lifted his paw and placed it gently on the captain's boot. A signal, a request, a plea. The girl's eyes widened. "He's telling you something. He never does that unless he's sure." The captain's chest tightened, emotions struggling to push through the wall he had built around his heart. "Sure. About what?" he whispered. Thor lifted his head, locked eyes with him, and gave a short, firm bark. The kind of bark trained dogs used when they had found a trail. A sound that made every person in the diner go still. Because even though no one understood how, Thor had just announced that he knew something. Something about the missing boy. The captain stared at Thor, still trying to make sense of the dog's intense behavior. The diner felt frozen in time, forks suspended midair, conversations cut off, and every pair of eyes locked onto the scene, unfolding between a grieving soldier, a determined dog, and a little girl who finally stepped forward with a shaky breath. "My name's Emily," she whispered, placing a calming hand on Thor's back. "And I think he's trying to tell you something important." Captain Harris blinked, his voice barely steady. "Important? Emily, I don't even know your dog. Why would he?" Emily interrupted, her small voice unexpectedly firm. "Because he knows. Thor doesn't act like this unless he's found a trail." A stunned silence swept through the diner. Captain Harris felt his stomach twist. He wanted to believe her God. He wanted to, but desperation had fooled him before. "Emily," he said gently, "my son has been missing for weeks. Search teams, helicopters, trained dogs. None of them found anything." Emily nodded slowly. "I know. I heard my dad talking about it. Everyone in town has." She swallowed hard, her eyes bright with empathy no child should have to carry. But Thor is different. He doesn't need equipment or commands to sense someone who's lost. He just knows. Thor nudged the captain again, nose brushing the sleeve of his uniform. A soft whine escaped him, an urgent one. Emily took a deep breath. "Captain, he thinks he can find your son." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. A woman near the counter gasped. A man at a booth murmured, "Is this real?" Even the waitress who had known the captain for years covered her mouth in disbelief. Captain Harris's pulse thundered in his ears. "Emily, are you sure? He's just a dog. A child's dog." Emily lifted her chin, eyes unwavering. "He's not just a dog. He's a search and rescue trained shepherd. And when he reacts like this, it means he's picked up a scent or a connection. My dad says some dogs can sense things people can't." Thor barked once. Loud. Certain. Captain Harris's breath trembled. He felt hope press painfully against his ribs, a feeling he had forced himself to bury for weeks. "Emily," he whispered, voice cracking. "Are you saying your dog can find Ethan?" Emily nodded, not hesitantly, not fearfully, but with a confidence so pure, so unwavering, that the captain felt his world tilt for the first time since his son vanished. "Yes," she said softly, "Thor can find your boy." And in that moment, surrounded by strangers holding their breath, Captain Harris felt hope return to life. For a moment, Captain Harris simply stared at Emily, trying to understand how a child could speak with so much certainty about something so impossible. Emily gently scratched behind Thor's ears, grounding herself before she began to explain, her voice soft but steady. "Thor wasn't always my dog," she said quietly. "He belonged to my dad first." Captain Harris raised an eyebrow, listening intently. Emily continued, "My dad works in search and rescue. He trains dogs to find people who get lost in the forest, especially hikers. Thor was the youngest dog he ever trained, and the smartest." She smiled faintly at the shepherd, who remained perfectly alert beside her. "He learned everything faster than the older dogs. It was like he already knew what people needed." Thor nudged her hand, as if confirming the story himself. "My dad says some dogs have a special gift, not just training intuition." Emily's eyes shone with something deeper than childhood innocence. "Thor can sense fear, panic, even certain scents that don't stay on clothes for long. He found his first missing person when he was only 1 year old." People in the diner exchanged stunned glances. Emily swallowed, her expression softening. That boy was only 6. He had wandered off during a camping trip. Everyone was searching, but it started getting dark, and they were scared he wouldn't last the night. She paused, remembering. "Thor walked straight into the woods, didn't even wait for instructions. He led my dad right to the kid, curled up behind a fallen tree, crying." Captain Harris felt a twinge in his chest. Emily continued, voice dropping to a whisper. "Thor stayed with the boy the whole walk back, like he knew he needed comfort. That's when my dad said Thor wasn't just a working dog. He was meant to save people." She took a deep breath. "A few months later, my dad gave him to me. He said Thor listens to me better than anyone, and that together, we make a perfect team." Emily shrugged softly. "I didn't understand what he meant until now." Thor shifted his weight and leaned gently against Captain Harris's leg, a quiet message of reassurance. Emily looked up at him again. "Captain, Thor doesn't get confused. When he reacts like this, it's because he recognizes something related to someone missing. Sometimes it's a scent, sometimes it's a trace of something they touched. Sometimes, she hesitated, it's just a feeling he can't ignore. Captain Harris felt his breath catch. The diner seemed to fade away, leaving only the dog, the girl, and the fragile thread of hope tightening in his chest. Emily placed her hand on Thor's back once more. "He's telling you the truth," she whispered. "And Thor never lies." The diner felt suspended in a strange stillness as Captain Harris processed everything he had just heard. Emily's words swirled in his mind, pushing against the heavy wall of doubt he had built to protect himself from more heartbreak. Thor's presence, steady and unyielding, only deepened the tension inside him. Captain Harris finally exhaled, long and shaky. "Emily," he said gently, "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but following a lead that might not be real, it's dangerous. For both of you." Emily didn't flinch. "But Thor thinks it's real," she replied. "Isn't that worth something?" Her innocent question struck him harder than she could ever understand. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to believe, but hope had betrayed him before. He rubbed his forehead, trying to steady his thoughts. "Look, when Ethan first went missing, I trusted every clue, every rumor, every possible sign." His voice cracked softly. "Each time, it led nowhere. Each time, I came home without him." Emily's eyes softened. "But you kept looking." "Because he's my son," the captain whispered, grief tightening his throat. "But every dead end, it's like losing him all over again." Thor stepped closer and rested his head against the captain's knee. The diner watched with quiet astonishment. Dogs didn't comfort strangers unless they sensed deep pain. Thor wasn't just reacting to a scent, now he was responding to the father's breaking heart. Emily took a small step forward. "Captain Harris, do you know why Thor approached you today and not before?" The captain shook his head silently. "Because today, he finally found the trail," Emily said softly. "He smelled something on you. Something that matters." Thor doesn't get confused about things like this. Captain Harris looked at Thor, who stared back with unwavering intensity. For a moment, something inside him cracked. Beneath all the exhaustion, he felt a flicker of something he feared more than despair, hope. But hope was dangerous. He clenched his jaw. "Emily, what if Thor is wrong?" Emily didn't reply right away. She glanced down at Thor, then back at the captain with innocent certainty. "What if he's right?" Those 5 words landed heavier than any argument. Thor barked once sharp, insistent, then sat again, tail still, posture strong, a silent command, "Follow me." Captain Harris closed his eyes for a brief second, battling the storm inside. Trust a child? Trust her dog? Trust a trail no one else could find? Slowly, painfully, he opened his eyes. And for the first time in weeks, something in his expression began to shift. A quiet tension filled the diner as Captain Harris rose slowly from his seat. His movements were hesitant, almost afraid to disturb the fragile hope forming in the air. Emily stepped back, giving Thor space. The German shepherd lowered his head, nostrils flaring as he sniffed the captain's jacket again with laser-sharp focus. "Is he smelling something specific?" Captain Harris asked, his voice unsteady. Emily nodded. "Let him work. When he finds a trail, he always starts the same way, slow, then sudden." Thor circled the captain, nose brushing against the seams of the uniform. The boots, even the air around him. Something about the scent triggered an unmistakable reaction. Every muscle in Thor's body tightened with purpose. Emily's eyes widened. "There, that's it. He found it." Captain Harris swallowed. "Found what?" Emily crouched beside Thor. "A trace of Ethan." Those words hit the captain like a punch to the chest. Thor suddenly jerked forward, not out of panic, but certainty, pulling Emily gently toward the door. His ears pointed firmly in one direction, his tail straight like an arrow. The dog wasn't wandering. He had made a decision. "He wants us to follow," Emily said, struggling to keep her balance as she tightened her grip on the leash. The captain hesitated only a moment before pulling out a small, folded piece of cloth from his pocket, Ethan's last worn jacket. He had carried it everywhere for the past 3 weeks, unable to let it go. He knelt in front of Thor. "Is this what you smelled?" he whispered, offering the fabric. Thor sniffed the jacket once, twice, and then his entire demeanor snapped into focus. His breathing changed, his posture shifted, his eyes sharpened. A low, determined rumble grew in his throat. Emily gasped. He's locked in. Thor barked sharply, then pushed forward so strongly that Emily stumbled. The captain grabbed her shoulder to steady her as the dog pointed toward the edge of town. He wants to leave now, Emily said breathlessly. Whatever he's found, it's fresh enough to track. Fresh? The word made Captain Harris's heart pound. People in the diner crowded near the windows, watching in stunned silence. Even the waitress stepped outside, whispering a prayer under her breath. Captain Harris forced himself to breathe deeply. Emily, are you sure you want to do this? It could be dangerous. Emily held Thor's leash with both hands, her small fingers trembling, but her voice was brave. If Thor goes, I go. That's how it works. Thor barked again, louder, demanding movement. Captain Harris exhaled. All right, he said quietly. Lead the way, boy. Thor shot forward, guiding them across the parking lot, nose glued to the ground as if following a line only he could see. Emily jogged to keep up, and the captain stayed close behind her, his boots hitting the pavement with growing urgency. The dog paused only once, raising his head to check the wind, then veered sharply toward the thick line of trees marking the entrance to the forest. Captain Harris felt his pulse hammer. For the first time in weeks, someone, somehow, had found a trail, and Thor was determined to follow it. Thor moved with a determination that left no room for doubt. His paws hit the ground in rapid, confident strides as he led Emily and Captain Harris toward the entrance of the forest. The trees loomed tall and silent, their shadows stretching across the dirt path like warning signs. But Thor didn't hesitate, not even for a second. He plunged forward, nose close to the earth, tail stiff, body tense with purpose. Emily tightened her grip on the leash, breath coming fast. He's following something strong, she said between breaths. I've never seen him this sure. Captain Harris scanned the surroundings, instincts kicking in. The woods were dense, quiet, too quiet. He had spent years navigating harsh terrains overseas, but this forest, its closeness, its haunting stillness, felt heavier than anything he'd stepped into before. Because this time, he wasn't searching for an enemy, he was searching for his son. Thor veered left suddenly, pulling Emily off the main path and into thicker brush. Branches brushed against her arms, leaves crunching under her feet. Captain Harris stayed right behind her, clearing low branches before they could hit her face. Despite everything, he found himself silently grateful for her bravery. He knows where he's going, Emily whispered, almost as if afraid to break the spell. Thor paused for the briefest moment, sniffing a patch of soil near a fallen tree. His ears twitched, and then without warning he shot forward again, deeper into the woods. Captain Harris felt his heart pounding with each step. Every sound, every rustle, every snap of a twig cut through him like a blade. What if they were too late? What if Ethan had been out here all this time, scared and alone? No, he couldn't think like that. Not now. A soft wind rustled through the treetops, carrying with it a faint scent of pine and damp earth. Thor lifted his head, sniffing the air intensely, then growled a low rumbling sound that made Emily freeze. What does that mean? The captain asked quickly, eyes darting around. Emily swallowed. It means we're close to something. Thor pushed forward again, leading them down a narrow slope where the ground dipped unevenly. Captain Harris grabbed Emily's arm to steady her as loose dirt slid beneath their feet. The forest around them grew darker, thicker. Sunlight struggled to break through the tangled canopy above. The farther they went, the more Captain Harris felt the pressure tightening in his chest. Thor stopped suddenly. This time, he didn't sniff. He didn't bark. He stood still, frozen, staring straight ahead into a patch of tall, unmoving grass. Emily's voice trembled. Why did he stop? Captain Harris looked at Thor closely. The dog's fur bristled, muscles coiled like a spring. He lifted one paw off the ground, a sign of alert. Not danger. Discovery. The captain stepped forward cautiously, his voice barely a breath. Are you telling me? Thor let out a sharp, urgent bark. Emily gasped. Captain Harris felt the world tilt. The dog had found something. Something important. Something Ethan had left behind. Thor's sharp bark sliced through the thick silence of the forest. Captain Harris felt his breath catch as he rushed to where the dog stood, frozen, staring intensely at the tall patch of grass. Emily hurried beside him, gripping the leash with both hands. The moment they stepped closer, Thor pushed his head into the grass, sniffing deeply, then let out a low, trembling whine. Captain Harris knelt, parting the tall blades with shaking fingers. And then he saw it. A torn piece of fabric, blue, soft, frayed at the edges. For a heartbeat, he couldn't breathe. Emily crouched beside him. "Captain, is that?" His voice cracked. "It's Ethan's. It's from his backpack." The fabric was snagged on a broken branch lying in the dirt, but it wasn't alone. As the captain looked closer, he noticed something else. Deep impressions in the soil, uneven and scattered. Footprints, small ones, but they weren't moving in a straight line. They dragged, stumbled, circled. Emily whispered, "This looks like someone fell." Thor suddenly growled, low and uneasy, as he moved a few feet ahead. His body stiffened, his tail lifted straight, signaling tension. The captain followed the dog's line of sight and felt a cold wave wash over him. The ground ahead was disturbed. Branches snapped, leaves crushed, soil scraped away in a struggle. Ethan hadn't just walked through here. Something had happened. Captain Harris swallowed hard, his heart pounding with painful force. "These marks, they're fresh, a few days at most." He touched the dirt gently. Ethan was here. He was alive. He fought. Emily's eyes filled with worry. "Do you think someone was with him?" The captain didn't answer, but his silence said enough. Thor suddenly lunged to the right, pulling Emily with him. He dove behind a fallen log, barking with urgency. Captain Harris followed, his pulse roaring in his ears. There, half buried under branches, was another clue. A water bottle. Ethan's. The captain recognized the faded sticker on the side, a superhero Ethan adored. He picked it up with trembling hands. The bottle's cap was cracked, broken, as if pulled or dropped during a struggle. Emily covered her mouth. "Captain, he didn't lose these things by accident." "No," the captain whispered, gripping the bottle tightly. "Someone was here with him." Thor whined, nudging the ground near the log. His paws scraped the dirt, revealing deeper impressions, larger footprints. Adult-sized, heavy. Emily's voice shook. "Somebody took him?" Captain Harris felt a sharp, gut-wrenching pain in his chest. Or he was running from someone. Thor barked again, more frantic now. He darted forward, nose glued to the earth, following a scent that had grown stronger with every clue. His movements were faster, more urgent, signs that the trail was no longer faint. The captain looked at Emily. Determination replacing fear. "Wherever Ethan went after this, Thor knows." Emily nodded, gripping the leash tighter. "Then we follow him." With one last look at the torn fabric, the footprints, and the signs of struggle left behind, the captain rose to his feet. The trail had changed. This was no longer just a search. It was a rescue. Thor tore through the woods with renewed intensity, his movements faster, sharper, more urgent than before. Emily struggled to keep up, her breath short and quick, but she didn't let go of the leash. Captain Harris stayed close behind, his boots pounding against the uneven ground as the forest grew darker and denser with every step. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. No birds, no insects, only the sound of Thor's paws hitting the ground and the heavy breathing of the two people chasing him. Suddenly, Thor slowed. He lowered his body, tail straight, ears pinned forward. Emily gasped. "He's found something." Captain Harris scanned the surroundings. Beyond the thick brush, half hidden between towering pines, stood an old wooden shack, weathered, leaning slightly, swallowed by vines and shadows. The windows were boarded from the inside. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges. It looked abandoned, completely forgotten, yet Thor stared at it with terrifying certainty. The captain's heart thudded painfully. "Emily, has your dog ever led you to a place like this?" She shook her head, eyes wide. "Never. But if Thor stops like this, it means someone was here. Recently." Thor crept closer, sniffing the air near the shack's entrance. Then he growled, not loud, but deep, vibrating through the stillness around them. A warning, a signal, a truth he couldn't speak but understood. Captain Harris slowly approached the shack, each step heavier than the last. His fingers brushed against the splintered wood of the doorframe. Cold, damp, but not untouched. Someone had moved it recently. Someone had gone in or come out. He swallowed, pushing gently. The door creaked open. Inside, the air felt stale, thick, as if time had suffocated everything within. Dust floated through the narrow beams of weak sunlight, slipping in through the cracks. The smell of damp wood and old earth filled the space. Emily stepped in behind him, Thor at her side, nose twitching rapidly. The shack was nearly empty, just a rotted table, a broken chair, and scattered debris. But it wasn't what was inside that made Captain Harris freeze. It was what wasn't inside. No people. No signs of life. No Ethan. But Thor wasn't finished. The German shepherd tugged Emily toward the corner of the shack, where the floorboards were scratched freshly. Someone had knelt there. Or someone had been dragged. Thor sniffed again and let out a soft whine. The captain knelt beside him, pressing a hand to the wooden planks. That's when he noticed a faint footprint in the dust, small, barely visible but unmistakable. Ethan's size, Emily whispered. He was here. Not long ago. Captain Harris felt his throat tighten, emotion twisting painfully inside him. His son had been inside this abandoned shack. Had he hidden here? Had he been trapped? Had he escaped? Thor lifted his head, nose pointed toward the back wall, toward something beyond these thin boards. Emily looked at Captain Harris with trembling anticipation. He's not done yet, she whispered. And Thor barked sharply, spinning toward a narrow trail behind the shack. A trail someone didn't want anyone to find. Thor's sudden turn toward the back wall sent a ripple of tension through the small shack. The German shepherd's body stiffened, paws planted firmly on the dusty floorboards as he growled a low, vibrating warning that made Emily instinctively step closer to Captain Harris. "What is it?" the captain whispered, scanning the dim corners of the shack. Thor ignored the question. His paws scratched at the bottom of the wall, sending flakes of rotting wood scattering across the floor. He pushed his nose into a narrow gap between the planks, inhaling sharply. Then, with a deep rumble of urgency, he moved toward a small wooden crate shoved against the wall. Emily tugged gently. "Thor, careful." But Thor didn't stop. He nudged the crate hard with his snout until it slid aside, revealing a hidden space behind it. Captain Harris crouched instantly, adrenaline spiking through his veins. Inside the shallow opening were objects that didn't belong in an abandoned shack. Objects that told a story more disturbing than anything he had imagined. First, he found a small flashlight, Ethan's. The blue plastic casing was scratched, the switch stiff but unmistakable. The captain's breath hitched as he lifted it gently, fingers trembling. "Ethan carries that everywhere," he whispered. "He never goes on hikes without it." Emily's face softened with sympathy. Thor sniffed the flashlight intensely, then pressed his nose deeper into the hidden compartment. Next, the captain pulled out a small radio, old military style, with a cracked antenna. He frowned, examining it. "This isn't Ethan's." His voice hardened. "But someone was using it recently." Emily's eyes widened. "Someone was here with him? Or watching him?" the captain muttered. The final object was the one that chilled him the most. A folded piece of cloth, darker than Ethan's belongings. When he opened it, he found a makeshift bandage stained faintly with dried blood. Not enough to be life-threatening, but enough to confirm Ethan had been hurt. Captain Harris froze, gripping the bandage tightly. His lungs felt locked, his mind spinning. "He was injured," he whispered, pain trembling beneath every word. "My boy was bleeding." Emily touched his arm gently. "Captain, if Thor is following his trail, then Ethan was alive when he left here." He nodded slowly. Alive, but hurt, and not alone. Thor suddenly barked, sharp and loud, the sound bouncing off the shack's walls. He backed away from the hiding spot and positioned himself near the doorway. His body was angled toward the trail behind the shack, head high, tail rigid, eyes focused like a laser. "He wants us to go," Emily said. "He's sure." Before the captain could respond, Thor lunged toward the exit and began barking insistently, urging them forward. Emily hurried after him, and Captain Harris took one last look at the hidden items, the flashlight, the radio, the blood-stained cloth. Ethan had been here. Someone else had been here too. And whatever had happened inside this shack was only part of the story. Captain Harris stood and followed Thor outside, his heart pounding harder with every step. Because if Thor had found this much inside the shack, what he would find next could change everything. Thor shot out of the shack like a bullet, pulling Emily toward the narrow trail hidden behind the rotting structure. Captain Harris followed closely, his heart pounding as the forest seemed to close in around them. The air felt colder here, heavier like the trees themselves were holding onto a secret. Thor slowed near a cluster of bushes, his nose sweeping across the ground. Then he froze. His tail stiffened. His ears shot upward. "Something's here," Emily breathed. Captain Harris moved beside Thor, scanning the dirt. At first, he didn't see anything unusual, just leaves, twigs, and patches of dark soil. But then a small glint caught his eye. Half buried beneath a thin layer of leaves was a tiny metal object. He knelt, brushing the leaves aside. His breath hitched. It was Ethan's compass. A silver compass with a scratched lid, one the captain had given his son before a school camping trip. Ethan had loved it, carried it everywhere. He said it made him feel like an explorer. Captain Harris swallowed hard. This is his. He dropped this. Emily crouched beside him, touching the compass gently. "Captain, this wasn't dropped accidentally." She pointed to the ground. The compass wasn't lying randomly, it had been placed. Carefully, deliberately. "Someone put it here," she whispered. Thor began sniffing the surrounding grass, pacing in small circles. Then he stopped at a tree trunk nearby and barked sharply. Emily rushed to him, confusion on her face. "What is it, boy?" "Dot time." Thor scratched the bark with his paw. Captain Harris moved closer and felt his blood run cold. Carved into the bark, faint but readable, were letters. Small, uneven, shaking. "Dad, help." The captain stumbled backward, a choke sound escaping his throat. His hand flew to his mouth as his eyes widened with disbelief. "Ethan," he whispered. "He was here. He wrote this." Emily's voice trembled. "Captain, he left you a message. He knew you'd come." The meaning struck him like a bolt of lightning. Ethan hadn't given up. Ethan had been alive long enough to carve this. Ethan had believed his father would find him. Captain Harris pressed his palm gently against the carved letters, feeling the grooves beneath his fingers. It was messy, rushed, desperate yet full of hope. The message wasn't just a cry for help. It was a sign of strength, a sign that Ethan was fighting to survive. Thor barked again, this time louder, more urgent. He darted forward, nose pressed to the ground as if the scent trail had suddenly brightened, sharpened, intensified. Emily looked at the captain. "He's telling us to move. Whatever happened, whatever danger Ethan was in, it's not over." Captain Harris rose to his feet, tears burning in his eyes, but behind those tears, something fierce awakened. Determination. His son had reached out to him across the wilderness, and now he would reach back with everything he had. He clenched his fists, jaw set. "Lead the way, Thor," he whispered. The dog barked once, and the chase began again. Thor sprinted ahead with renewed purpose, his paws hammering against the forest floor as if every second mattered. Emily clutched the leash tightly, struggling to keep up as branches whipped past her. Captain Harris stayed close behind, adrenaline flooding through him. Ethan's carved message had changed everything. His boy wasn't just missing, he was in danger, and every minute could be the difference between life and loss. "Emily, stay right behind Thor," the captain urged, breath heavy. "He knows exactly where he's going." Emily nodded, though her face was pale. "He's never acted like this before," she said. "Not even on rescues." Something's wrong. The forest grew darker the deeper they went, as if the sunlight itself refused to enter the place they were heading. Thor didn't slow, not even when the terrain grew steep and the air colder. His ears were pinned forward, every muscle rigid. He lifted his nose once, catching a scent carried by the wind, and growled. Captain Harris felt fear twist inside him. "What do you smell, boy?" he whispered. Thor took off again, pulling Emily with such force that the captain grabbed her shoulder to keep her from falling. The urgency in the dog's movements told him everything. Ethan was close, but not safe. There was something else out here, something that made even Thor tense. The wind shifted, carrying a faint metallic smell through the air. The captain recognized it instantly. Blood. Emily's eyes widened. "Captain, Thor's scared." He nodded grimly. "I know." They reached a clearing where the underbrush had been violently disturbed. Footprints, large ones, cut through the dirt in frantic patterns. The captain crouched to examine them. Fresh, deep, leading uphill. Thor whined, pacing in circles as if torn between fear and determination. "What is it, boy?" Emily whispered. Thor barked sharply, then lunged toward the slope, practically dragging them up the incline. Captain Harris followed, heart racing so fast it hurt. Every step felt heavier, every breath tighter. He could almost feel Ethan's fear lingering in the air. Halfway up, Thor stopped abruptly. His body lowered, ears flattened. He let out a trembling growl and pointed his nose toward a narrow ridge ahead. Captain Harris stared at the ridge, his pulse thundering. Ethan had been here. Someone had chased him, and they were close. Too close. Emily swallowed hard. "We have to hurry." The captain clenched his fists, jaw tight. "We don't stop. Not until we find him." Thor barked once loud, urgent, then charged toward the ridge, with the kind of desperation that only came when time was running out. And the captain knew. This wasn't just a search anymore. It was a race to save Ethan's life. Thor charged up the narrow ridge with a speed that made Emily stumble, but she refused to let go. Captain Harris stayed right behind them, his breath sharp, his heart pounding so violently he could feel it in his throat. Every instinct in him screamed that they were close, so close he could almost hear Ethan calling out in the wind. The ridge narrowed, the drop on one side dangerously steep. Thor paused only long enough to sniff the ground before barking sharply and veering toward a cluster of boulders ahead. His entire body shook with urgency. Emily gasped. "He's right there," he thinks. "Ethan is right there." Captain Harris felt his legs weaken, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He scrambled over rocks, hands gripping cold stone, boots sliding on loose gravel. Thor squeezed through a small gap between two jagged boulders and disappeared. "Thor!" Emily cried, crawling after him. The captain didn't think he'd drop to his knees and push through the gap. What he saw on the other side made his world tilt. A small, hidden ravine, shaded, cold, nearly invisible from above, and lying at the base of it, half covered by leaves and dirt, was a boy. Motionless, pale, his clothes torn, his hair matted with dust and dried mud. "Ethan," the captain whispered, voice cracking. Emily's breath hitched. "Oh no." But Thor didn't hesitate. He bolted straight to the boy, pressing his nose against Ethan's shoulder, whining, licking his cheek urgently as if begging him to wake up. His tail beat frantically against the ground. Fearful, hopeful, desperate. Captain Harris slid down into the ravine, stumbling the last few feet before dropping to his knees beside his son. His hands trembled as he turned Ethan gently onto his back. Ethan's face was scraped, and there were bruises along his arms. His breathing was faint, shallow, uneven, but it was there. It was real. "Ethan, buddy, can you hear me?" the captain whispered, tears streaming down his face. Ethan's eyelids fluttered. For a moment he seemed lost in a fog. Then his gaze focused, just barely, on the shadow hovering above him. "Dad," he whispered, voice weak and cracked. The captain broke. He pulled Ethan into his arms, holding him carefully, protectively, as his entire body shook with relief. "I'm here. I'm right here. I've got you, son. I've got you." Emily covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Thor lay beside Ethan, pressing close to him, refusing to move. Ethan winced softly. I tried to go home, but he pushed me." His voice trailed off, words fading. Captain Harris swallowed hard. "It's okay. You're safe now. You're safe." He lifted his head, scanning Ethan's injuries. His right leg was swollen, likely sprained or fractured. His clothes were torn from the struggle, and exhaustion clung to every inch of him. Emily wiped her eyes. "Captain, he needs help fast." Captain Harris nodded. "We're calling for backup." He pulled out his radio with shaking hands. "This is Captain Harris. I've located Ethan. He's alive. Request immediate medical evacuation at grid." Before he finished, Ethan's hand gripped his sleeve with surprising strength. "Dad," he whispered, tears forming. "I knew you'd find me." The captain leaned close, forehead resting gently on his son's. "I'd cross every mile of this earth to find you, and I wasn't alone." He looked at Thor. "He brought me to you." Thor wagged his tail weakly, as if understanding the praise. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Help was coming. Emily exhaled with relief. "We did it. Thor did it." The captain held his son tightly, warmth finally seeping back into his chest. For the first time in 3 agonizing weeks, Ethan was safe. He was found. He was home. The ambulance raced down the forest road, sirens echoing through the trees as paramedics worked urgently over Ethan. Captain Harris sat inside, gripping his son's hand with both of his. Ethan was weak, exhausted, but conscious, leaning against his father's shoulder as if afraid to let go again. Emily and Thor followed in a second vehicle, escorted by local officers who insisted they be part of the process. After all, without them, this story would have ended very differently. When they reached the hospital, the captain carried Ethan inside, refusing to let anyone else take him. Nurses guided them to a treatment room, while doctors rushed in to assess injuries. Emily watched from the hallway, shoulders tight with worry. Thor pressed against her leg like a loyal shadow. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the captain stepped out. Exhaustion etched across his face, but this time, there was something else with it. Relief. "He's going to be okay," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "A little dehydrated, bruised, scared, but he's going to be okay." Emily exhaled in one shaky breath, closing her eyes. Thor wagged his tail, nudging the captain's hand as if asking for confirmation himself. The captain knelt and placed both hands on Thor's face. "You found him," he whispered. "You saved my boy." Thor pressed his forehead into the captain's chest, as if claiming him in that moment not as a soldier, but as a father reunited with his child. A few hours later, after Ethan was stabilized and resting, the captain stepped into the waiting room where Emily and Thor sat. Emily jumped to her feet. Can I see him?" The captain smiled gently. "He's asleep right now, but he's been asking about the brave girl who helped save him." Emily's eyes shone with pride. The captain sat beside her. "Emily, you were fearless out there. Most adults wouldn't have done what you did today." She looked down shyly. "I just trusted Thor." "Then Thor trusted you," he replied. "And because of that, I have my son back." Thor rested his head on the captain's knee, content and calm, for the first time since the search began. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting warm light into the waiting room, a nurse approached with a small envelope in her hand. "This was from Ethan," she said softly. "He wanted you to have it." The captain opened it carefully. Inside was a simple handwritten note, shaky, uneven, written with a trembling hand. "Tell the girl and her dog, they're my heroes." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. Thor leaned closer, letting her rest her hand on his neck. The captain folded the note gently. "Ethan said something else too," he added. "He said he heard Thor barking somewhere far away, and it gave him hope." Emily covered her mouth, overwhelmed. The captain stood, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't just help find him, you kept him fighting." Outside the hospital, news crews began gathering, drawn by whispers of the incredible rescue. But inside, away from the cameras, something far more meaningful was happening. A soldier found his son. A little girl became a hero. And a dog proved that sometimes miracles come on four paws.